Many of you, if you've been somewhat alert and aware, ever since the canonization, the cause of canonization has been pressed forward. Yeah, can you not hear me? Hard to believe. So anyway, let that be a lesson to you, Christian. Okay, thank you. Thanks for the quality control check back there. So, okay, so many of you have noticed that since the cause of canonization has been pressed for Junipero Serra by our own beloved Pope back in 2015, so that there has been an increase in the some information, positioning of people who feel like St. Junipero Serra, I don't know, we don't think he was so great. And actually to the point where there's been desecrations of the statue up here at up at Santa Barbara and other places, and just a big pushback. You might have heard recently about the pushback from the Stanford University and the renaming and the causes and things of that nature, just trying to create some dissent, if you will, about who St. Junipero Serra was. And so one voice in the wilderness that has come out for us to help say, hey, wait a minute, there's a little bit of a light here, and really to help inform us about more about the background, kind of what our own Episcopal moderator talked about, our Cardinal talked about study. Well, part of study is understand the reputation of our own patron saint. So his reputation and his history. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide you some of that. Kristen Clifford is a high school teacher, high school, teaches juniors in high school theology up at none other than Junipero Serra High School, San Mateo, California, up the road quite a few hours actually. But we're glad he's here. He's going to give a presentation about St. Junipero Serra, his personal quest to learn more and to get fired up about defending St. Junipero Serra's reputation as the man that he is, that we believe him to be, saint and apostle and friend of the Indians. Okay, so Christian, come on up. While he's up here, you're going to recognize that everybody got a copy of his book in here that is going to be a great resource for you too, and he'll refer to this, but purposefully we put that in your packet so that you would have something to take home with you. So you're going to hear it from the man right now. So here you go.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Greg, for the invitation to come and speak today. It is wonderful to be speaking to Serrans about the California missions and their founder, St. Junipero Serra. Junipero Serra Ferrer, OFM, given name Miguel Jose Serra Ferrer, has been given many titles. Father of the California missions, Apostle of California, Evangelizer of the West, a founding father of the United States, the United States' first Hispanic saint. Not everyone admires Serra, though, as you can see here. Just a couple samplings. As you're aware, my first book, which you have a copy of, I used to have an old Twitter account for, and I've written two since. But you can see here, my first Twitter was at St. Serra 1. Some guy by the name of Pythagoras. Serra's a criminal, should have been hanged. He's a more successful version of Himmler. Here we see up at Mission Dolores. I know some of you will be visiting there soon. This guy here has this of course is around the time, shortly after Pope Francis announced that he'd be canonizing Serra. He condoned genocide. Now you want to sanctify. Shame, shame. This is at Mission Carmel, the one in the middle, statue of San Junipero Serra. And it was toppled just a few days after the actual canonization. And shortly thereafter, this is in Monterey, the one on the right, on the Fort Ord Army base. But there is access to the general public, and he was beheaded. Since the canonization, memorials of the patron of vocations have been vandalized 6 times at Monterey, twice in Carmel, in Mission Hills, Old Mission Santa Barbara, and Mission San Gabriel. The front wooden doors and a side wall at Mission Santa Cruz were spray painted in red with the message, Serra, Saint of Genocide. And most recently, as Greg pointed out, another house of worship, Mission Santa Barbara, was vandalized. So at Mission Santa Barbara, for clarity's sake, a statue and the actual church itself, 2 separate occasions. Once the canonization was announced by Pope Francis in January 2015, many in the media, both Catholic and mainstream, portrayed it as controversial. One was either for or against it. Here are some examples. From our Sunday Visitor Newsweekly, the title of this article, Fact or Fiction? Historians weigh in on Serra. This one here, Reese, NCR, National Catholic Reporter, Junipero Serra, subtitle, Saint or Not. Maureen Pratt's article is a really excellent article, but the title here also, this kind of either or, Junipero Serra, Saint or Scoundrel. And this one's probably the most level-headed. This is from Alan Uhas. Junipero Serra's road to sainthood is controversial for Native Americans. Sorry. The next one is the more level-headed. Vatican defends canonization of Junipero Serra, controversial Hispanic evangelizer. I must have gotten rid of that one. This is the most level-headed. Yes, 3rd time's a charm. Hackle, and it's the competing legacies of Serra. Pioneer, saint, villain. So there, at least he doesn't have the or, right? Like you have to make a choice here, right? You're not smart enough. You got to make a choice. Serra's story is not so black and white. Boyd Cothran, professor of Indigenous and Cultural History at York University in Toronto, succinctly encapsulates the discussion of Serra by saying, it's really complicated. This was the major reason that I wrote my first book, Saint Junipero Serra. Notice its subtitle, and my goal, my purpose, making sense of the history and legacy, in particular for young people whom I teach. To help us rediscover, there we go. To help us rediscover St. Junipero Serra, I'll be talking about the following. Background to Junipero Serra, Serra the miracle, Serra's legacy, Serra's relevance in the past, the controversy, my own journey, and what Serrans can do. Background. What kind of life did Junipero Serra lead? Serra was born and baptized on November 24th, 1713, in the town of Petra, Majorca, Spain. Majorca is the largest of the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean. He grew up in a poor and deeply religious community. He had a sister. His teachers were Franciscans who noticed his deep faith and intellect when he was just a young boy. In 1737, after many years of study, he was ordained a Catholic priest of the Order of Friars Minor, also known as the Franciscans. He would take the name Junipero after St. Francis's sidekick. His main ministry from 1740 to 1749 was professor of sacred theology and philosophy at Lulian University in Palma, Majorca. He was very popular with his students, yet something gnawed at his heart. He felt God calling him to serve in some other way. When the call came from New Spain for missionaries, he responded with a resounding yes. On December 17, 1749, after a difficult time crossing the Atlantic, he landed at Veracruz in modern-day Mexico. For the next 20 years, he served communities, mainly the Pame Indians, who were already Catholic. His dream had always been to bring the good news of Jesus Christ to those who never heard it before. He would get his wish in 1769, a few days' journey south of San Diego. By the way, this year commemorates the 250th anniversary of this event. For the next 15 years, he would set up 9 missions in present-day California, from San Diego in the south to San Francisco in the north. He died at Mission Carmel on August 28, 1784. If you need inspiration, look no further than our own patron, Saint Junipero Serra, whose travails show us what prayer, faith, and sacrifice can achieve. End quote. Mario, you were spot on. When Serra left Old California, now known as Baja California, and entered New California, as shown in this 1787 map by Diego Troncoso, he was an old man who came to uncharted territory. Here he would rise above the life of an ordinary man. Recall that he discerned God's call to be a missionary and sacrificed so much by leaving his loved ones to serve Christ by serving strangers. He even shared with the governor that if the natives should kill him, that they should be forgiven and pardoned. He tried his best to learn native languages so that he could help them understand the faith, which he wasn't so hot at. Okay, he had a tough go of that. He stood up for justice, penning what has been coined by historians as the Native Bill of Rights. And he was also a man of his time, using self-flagellation as a form of penance and upholding corporal punishment, both common practices during Serra's day. For many, it is not a shock that Pope Francis dispensed of the usually required second miracle. Serra's life is the second miracle. He was 5 feet 2 inches, short by even the standards of his time. He voluntarily left the comforts of home, knowing full well he would never return. On his first night in New Spain, just outside Veracruz, he was bitten by an insect. It would cause him great pain, off and on, for the rest of his life. He was asthmatic. He was only expected to live a few days. We know this because he was baptized just hours after he was born. And look at what he accomplished. He lived 70 years, 9 months, and 4 days. The average lifespan in the late 18th century for a male was between 30 and 40 years. I think his life was one well lived. Many of us already knew this, having prayed to him to intercede on our behalf for many, many years. Now, Serra's legacy. These numbers come from the Early California Population Project at the Huntington Library in San Marino, California, close to Pasadena. They were presented in 2006. They're from Mission Records, right? The numbers are based on records between 1769 and 1863. Keep in mind that the Spaniard area of influence was only about 50 to 60 miles from the coast. As you can see, the 21 here, just about 50 to 60 miles inland. The majority of native Californians lived outside this area of influence, or sphere of influence. Serra's legacy was 101,000 baptisms, 28,000 marriages, 71,000 burials at all 21 missions and from the Los Angeles Plaza Church and the Santa Barbara Presidio. As Jeffrey Burns, retired archivist of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, put it in an American Magazine article, what we Catholics celebrate with the canonization is not a failed missionary policy, and certainly not the death of so many indigenous people. What we celebrate is a man burning with missionary zeal who loved and engaged the native people of California. I, too, am confident that he wanted to do good by bringing Christ to the Indians. Serra never intended the outcome to be mass deaths because of the cultural exchange. What he intended was the baptized Indians being a light in the darkness. What he desired, but was never fully realized, can be encapsulated in the story of three people. While studying to become a priest in Rome, Pablo Toc wrote a description of life as a mission Indian, gave a public recitation of a poem at the Polyglot Academy, created a dictionary of the language of his people, and an account of the native peoples in Southern California. It is because of him that the language of the Luiseno was saved for posterity. Stanislaw was from a rancheria 50 miles east of Mission San Jose. He could read and write, was a vaquero, or a mule tamer, and rose to alcalde, the head mission Indian. Once when he went to his traditional home for a visit, he stayed longer than what was agreed upon. A search party was sent, and Stanislaw confirmed that he had no intention on coming back. An altercation took place. The Spanish and their Indian allies attacked. Stanislaw and his Indian allies repelled Mexican forces twice. Father Duran, the pastor at Mission San Jose, eventually received a pardon for Stanislaw after the fugitive returned to the mission. Stanislaw died due to an epidemic that struck the mission in 1839. Surely the mercy shown by Father Duran made the Indians who grew up with revenge as the way to deal with problems take pause. Then there is Lope Inigo, the Mission Santa Clara Indian who on November 23rd, 1839, petitioned Jose Castro for a land grant. Today, the land grant would make up, it's in Mountain View, California, the old Moffett Field Naval Air Station. Some of you might be familiar with that in the South Bay. Lope was one of a few California Indians to be granted land for his service to church and state. He lived during the Spanish, Mexican, and American periods in California. Now on to Serra's relevance in the past. Starting in 1821, the Franciscans were kicked out of the missions by the government of Mexico, and the missions fell into disrepair. Mexico could not finance their new lands. Native Californians were neglected. In 1848, because of the gold rush, Americans began to come in droves, and statehood followed in 1850. The native got in the way of so-called progress. More on that in a minute. In the late 19th century, California seemed a place in need of a past. Serra embodied the greatness of civilization for the people of the time, or I guess the worst, depending on perspective. Some of the following depictions, which only represent a fraction of those that exist, help tell this story. The first Serra statue I made reference to earlier, this is with its head on, is at Fort Ord, Monterey, and was erected by Jane L. Stanford of Stanford University fame in 1891. And yes, it's kind of confusing that she upholds him, and now there's a select group of students at Stanford that want to tear his name down. The next is located in Golden Gate Park, San Francisco. It was commissioned by James Phelan, mayor of San Francisco, from 1897 to 1902, eventually becomes a U.S. senator, and executed by Douglas Tilden, dedicated in November 1907. This one is located in the United States Capitol, National Statuary Hall. It was dedicated in 1931 to much fanfare. The main supporters of this were the native sons of the Golden West. This one is near my home. The Serra sculpture by Kenyon Kaiser was commissioned by the San Mateo Serra Club, donated to the city of San Mateo in 1969. If you visited any of the missions in California, odds are you've seen this one, commissioned by William H. Hannon, a devout Catholic and philanthropist from Los Angeles who made his fortune in real estate. It seems to me from these examples from the late 19th century to the 1960s that Serra had a cross-section of supporters. The controversy. This perspective is rooted in pain and suffering. It is a tragic history. It is our nation's first original sin, the decimation of the natives. It is important to note that it worked its way westward from the east, from the predominantly white Anglo-Saxon Protestant America. The Spanish story in California oftentimes gets wrongly placed with that history. As Boyd Cothran, professor of Indigenous Studies and Cultural History at York University in Toronto, put it, in a lot of ways, what does Serra represent? In the natives' minds, Serra represents the totality of the colonial experience. So when they're criticizing Serra, they're criticizing coercive Christian colonization and massive deaths and loss of culture. Opponents contest that Serra perpetrated genocide, enslaved others, and was cruel. First, regarding genocide. Keep in mind that 200 plus years had passed since Cortez and his native allies conquered the Aztec. Serra and his contemporary religious were aware of this part of Spanish history. They wanted to change hearts and minds with the cross, not the sword. It is true that many native Californians who came into contact with the mission system perished prematurely. This is almost entirely due to epidemics and pandemics. Benjamin Madley, Associate Professor of History at the University of California at Los Angeles, puts it into focus in his 2016 book, An American Genocide. Quote, "The indigenous population of California under Spanish rule dropped from 300,000 prior to 1769 to 250,000 in 1834. After Mexico won," he continues, "after Mexico won its independence from Spain, and after the secularization of the coastal missions by the Mexican government in 1834, the indigenous population suffered a province-wide pandemics, three, one in 1806, 1828, and 1838. The period immediately following the U.S. conquest of California has been characterized by numerous sources as a genocide. Under U.S. sovereignty, after 1848, the indigenous population plunged from perhaps 150,000 to 30,000 in 1870 and reached its nadir of 16,000 in 1900, end quote. The Spanish government, with the help of the church, was trying to create a little Spain here to keep Russia and Britain at bay. It begs the question, why would they intentionally, they being the Spanish, slaughter Indians? Next, I would like to speak to the accusation of enslavement. The missions only worked if laborers were plenty. According to scholars James Sandos and George Harwood, missions were designed to attract, not destroy. After learning the basics of what it meant to be Spanish, a Spanish Catholic, the native was required to work like the Spaniard. To leave the mission, one had to ask for permission. If one did not return on the prescribed day, one was seen as a deserter. It is estimated that 4 to 10% actually did. People from the mission would be sent out to retrieve the deserter. They would be given multiple chances to return. Once the final request was made and there was no response, soldiers, including mission Indian auxiliaries, would bring the culprit back by force if needed. The fear was the mission Indian would revert to old practices opposed to Christianity, thus putting their eternal salvation in jeopardy. Last, a few contend that Serra was cruel. In the previous example, Serra would have allowed for corporal punishment to make a point that desertion is not a part of the society. This would be taught first, and if broken, physical punishment would occur. This would happen to a Spanish soldier who deserted too. It would have been happened to an errant schoolboy back in Spain or in Mexico if he misbehaved. Cal Poly San Luis Obispo Professor Emeritus of History, Dan Krieger, explained in a Santa Maria Sun article that thick whips of cord were used that rarely broke skin. In this case, Serra was a man of his time. Society did not frown upon corporal punishment. Andrew Galvin, a Ohlone Indian and curator at Mission Dolores in San Francisco, sums it up best. In a San Francisco Magazine article, he asserted, "I blame the system, not the individual. Serra was a very good person operating in a very bad situation." The vast majority of Serra historians have exonerated Serra of accusations that he perpetrated genocide, enslaved others, and was cruel. My journey. This is my dad and me. Back in 2001, we went on a whirlwind road trip of the Northeast and Atlantic provinces in Canada. During my junior year of high school, I remember reading a couple of, not in 2001 for the record, that's not there, okay, about the Irish experience in America. I was confused. I mean, there are only a few pages in my history textbook on the Irish impact in America. So I went home and shared my confusion with my dad, who was very passionate about sharing his Irish-American history with his family. I asked my dad something like this, as many years ago. Dad, you've shared so much with me about the impact the Irish made in the U.S. Why are there only a few pages in my history book about this? And he said something about like this, and it really stuck with me. I'm pretty sure this is an exact quote. If you don't believe me, go to the library and find out for yourself. You have a library card, go use it. This advice has helped me tremendously, especially when it comes to a passion of mine, California mission history. In 2015, I went for a walk near Pacifica, California, near my home, and I came across this sign. I stopped and I read it. Spanish colonial period, 1776. For those of you that don't know, Pacifica, California is up in the Bay Area. Mission San Francisco de Asís in Presidio is established by Juan Bautista de Anza with pioneers from Mexico. Okay. Missions use newly baptized natives as captive labor. That made me pause. And I'm pretty sure if I were to do a survey of people who read this, they would think automatically of plantations in the South. Oh yeah, I'm gonna connect the two histories. Is that what the person who wrote this wants for the person? I don't know. But I was pretty ticked off and disturbed by it. So I actually started a campaign to have this change because the historical record is much more complicated than that, to present that as fact to the general public. I was dumbfounded, as I just pointed out, a little angry, and I started I was upset that the local government paid for a sign that was perpetuating such a falsehood. It motivated me to write 3 books about California mission history. My wife and I are both teachers. Thus, our family has made an annual pilgrimage to the shrine of St. Junipero, Serra to pray for a blessed school year. I've taken it a step further, recently walking the California Missions Trail. I've walked around 300 miles so far, and I have 500 to go. And please keep me in your prayers, because tomorrow I'm hoping to walk between Mission San Buenaventura and Mission Santa Barbara. And I'm hoping that my wife will be there at the end to take me back to the Bay Area. There's a certain je ne sais quoi about St. Junipero Serra. It seems that he will continue to inspire in ways that boggle the mind. What he built, what he built, called Dr. Rick Kennedy, professor of history at Point Loma Nazarene University in San Diego, to write a review essay of 3 new biographies of Serra. He shared with me, quote, "Serra is essential to understanding that California was founded as a mission field, and that Serra is, as the title of Stephen Hackle's biography proclaims, the founder of California. Second, although since the 1960s the global history of mission fields and missionaries has become much maligned and generalized under the category of cultural imperialism, the life of Serra offers a way of examining the high hopes and Christian ideals of the Spanish Empire as it moved north of Mexico," end quote. Serra's life inspired Craig Allen Huber to visit, over a 7-year period, the places where Serra lived: Mallorca, Mexico, and California. What he produced was a beautiful book titled The Spirit Within, San Junipero. Edie Littlefield Sunby, 2-time cancer survivor and author of The Mission Walker, was motivated to walk the entire 1,600-mile El Camino Real de las Californias from Loreto, Baja California, Mexico to Sonoma, California. Edie said it best, quote, "I felt very blessed to be following in the footsteps of a saint in this journey. The missions are our heritage. They are tremendously vital to the well-being of our state, and I believe Serra belongs to more than Catholics, to more than California. He is a saint for all of us." End quote. What fascinates me about Rick, Craig, and Edie is that they are all non-Catholic. They inspire me to want to shout from the mountaintop, Saint Junipero Serra is a saint for all. What Serrans can do. The Catholic Church is confident. The ecclesial court proceedings to question Serra's holiness began on December 12th, 1948. The evidence brought forth were 2,420 documents, 7,500 pages total of Serra's writings, 5,000 pages of materials written about him from those who knew him, and testimony of people inspired by his life. A summary of findings would be collected. For Serra, 1,200 pages in all. The evidence propelled Pope Francis to share in the homily at Serra's canonization on September 23rd, 2015 in Washington, D.C. Junipero Serra sought to defend the dignity of the Native community, to protect it from those who had mistreated and abused it. Those who malign Serra are often misinformed. It's okay, thanks. Perpetuating the Garden of Eden myth, practicing presentism, which is interpreting past events in terms of modern values and concepts, or blinded by victimhood. One of my most memorable encounters that cemented this for me occurred a couple of years ago. I happened upon a statement by a Native American university professor who was very outspoken in the days leading up to Serra's canonization. She wrote, "In the 65 years that the California missions were run by the Catholic Church, the numbers of California Indians went from about 1 million to 350,000. Having researched Serra, myself, and the missions for some time, the commonly accepted number among scholars is that California Indians numbered approximately 300,000 pre-contact. I shared that with you earlier. Therefore, I asked her for her sources. She kindly replied with her rationale and support. When I replied that it would be, don't you think it'd be fair to present the consensus view? Her tone changed. Boy, did it. She got very personal and argumentative, asking how long I have been working on this, mission studies, and that she did not think I was in any position to question her because I was white. It was hard to read. And I replied, I'm sorry that my question offended you. I am Catholic. Your assertion deals with my history too. It's easy to run or fight in such an instance. However, Christ compels us to practice the third way, to not back down and make the aggressor rethink their thinking. I pray she did. Saint Junipero Serra wrote to Fray Miguel de Petra from Mexico City on September 29, 1758. I realize my nothingness and feebleness for such a glorious enterprise, but God is powerful and can call great things out of nothing. It is evident to me that the reputation of a man who believed this and lived it is worth defending. Serra canonization, September 23rd, 2015. Summary. Pope Francis shared that Serra embodied going forth, met people where they were, and served and defended those on the margins. Let's do what Pope Francis shared and couple them with a deep relationship with and intercession of Saint Junipero Serra. If we do, we are destined to bring others closer to God's love and truth. We must heed the advice of John Lancaster Spalding, first bishop of the Diocese of Peoria and a co-founder of the Catholic University of America. He wrote, "With dignity rather than an combative spirit, enter into the living controversies of the age." My goal was to provide a short primer on St. Junipero Serra and California mission history. I hope that it has left you wanting to know more about this extraordinary man in an exciting era in history. Always forward, never back. St. Junipero Serra, pray for us.
Let's take a chance here while we have Christian here today with us. Are there any questions that anybody would like to ask him today? Yes, Carolyn, take it.
I just have two questions. Did you get to the, when they were canonizing, did you get to this? Could you tell us about that? And the other thing is my son-in-law walks that Spain trail.
Yeah.
So if he was to come over here, because he's done it now, he was looking for something else. How difficult, is it a trail or
So
how
it's
do I tell him to walk this?
Sure. So I would recommend that he contact, just put in the computer there, California Mission Walkers. Okay, and it's a group that is organized, and they help each other out because it's not quite. It's actually not much like, from what I understand, the Camino in Spain. Okay. Now your first question. I'm sorry. Can you? Oh yeah, it was great. My wife and I went to the. Yes, it was very exciting. Very exciting. So last minute, by the grace of God, I got 2 tickets to the canonization from the priest who was here the other day, the pastor at San Buenaventura. He celebrated Mass with you the other day, right? Father Tom Elawat, great guy. Never even met him, but he had read my first book, and we started a relationship online, emailing each other and so on. And yeah, just lucked out. It was a great, great time.
Has there been any pushback against the Stanfords, since their entire fortune was gained on the backs of the Chinese?
That's right.
It seems a little hypocritical for all this brouhaha up at Stanford.
Yeah, I think you're getting to something more deep. And for the most part, the pushback, you're looking at them, one-man show. Need more people like you kind of emailing them there and saying, because if they don't hear from you, they don't know that you're perturbed by it or upset by it. So it's really one of those situations where I think the loudest people win, not reason, not evidence, but the loudest group. And the group that was loud, very small, very small. What happened was they had all these committees, and one of the committees, in my understanding, following it, they had historians on there, and I'm pretty sure they were like, hey, the evidence for the things you're saying and what you want to do, no. But it got kicked up to the higher, and I think it was the president said, you know what, we want this to go away. We're going to appease this small group and move forward. And they did, in their estimation, they came up with a criteria that they're going to apply to everything that comes up in the future. So, yeah, logic dictates, why aren't they bringing it up about their own? See, this is where they're going to, well, it's not named after Governor Stanford. It's named after Junior, the son, right? So, hey, he died young, and I guess that's what the rationale they're going to use, because plenty of people, online, they make comments at the bottom like, what about Stanford? He made his fortune off the backs of Chinese. He was it's recorded, he's very racist, anyways.
Chris, I'm with the Kansas City, Missouri Serra Club. A little over a year ago, one of our members knew of a young attorney in Kansas City who had written a paper in his law degree, to get his law degree, and it was on support of Serra not being the malicious individual that he was portrayed. And he received an A on that paper. It's a rather extensive one. If you'd like, I would forward that to you and be glad to give you his name and contact.
I would very much. Thank you.
Sure.
Chris, did the city renew that notice board that you were talking about? You complained about the wording when you saw that notice?
Oh, this is a real fun one. That's actually how I came across. That's how I came across Father Tom Elowat. Now I recall, because I think I started. Who would be interested in this online petition? It was totally non-binding, but they have these online petitions now to get that out of there. And eventually I got, I think, about 250 signatures, and Father Tom Elowat was one of them. And so lo and behold, long, hard fight. They listened to me and the others and did a corrective. Guess what they did, though? My recommendation was just take the loaded language out and just white it out or something. Take the word captive out, and they just took the whole thing off, and they replaced it with something about birds. So nobody's going to be upset about that, right?
Hi, do you happen to know Kurt Buckley, who lives here in Ventura? Because he's in that organization.
Yes.
He's done the Camino 4 times,
Yes.
once from Poland all the way down.
Yeah.
He's done all of this whole entire California thing, 800
Yeah.
mile, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And he's fantastic.
Yeah, I do know the name. We haven't met personally, not yet. We will, though, I'm pretty sure, God willing.
I wondered if you might sign my new copy of St.
Of
Junipero.
course.
I've got a brand new book.
Of course.